What is Stoic minimalism? Let's start with a simple question. What does it mean to live simply? In today's world, the word minimalism often makes us think of clean white rooms, a closet with just a few shirts, or the idea of decluttering your house so that everything you own fits neatly in a backpack. It's a lifestyle trend, a design choice, sometimes even a brag on social media. But for the Stoics, minimalism wasn't about having fewer things for the sake of aesthetics. It wasn't about being trendy, and it certainly wasn't about showing off how little you owned. For them, simplicity was about something deeper, strength of the mind. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor of Rome, once wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." That line captures the essence of what I'd call Stoic minimalism. It's not about how many things you own. It's about how little you need in order to be at peace. The Stoic foundation. Let's rewind for a second. The Stoics, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus, lived in a time when Rome was overflowing with wealth, power, and excess. If you were rich, you had gold, slaves, villas, endless banquets. If you were poor, you still lived in a city where indulgence and luxury were constantly displayed in front of you. Yet, these philosophers looked at all of it, the palaces, the possessions, the power, and concluded that none of it really mattered. At least, not in the way people thought it did. Why? Because the Stoics believed that happiness and peace couldn't come from things outside of you. External things, money, possessions, status, were temporary. They could be lost, stolen, destroyed. And if your happiness depends on things that fragile, then your happiness is fragile too. So instead, they turned inward. They said, focus on what you can truly control, your thoughts, your actions, your character. Everything else is secondary. Minimalism beyond possessions. This is where Stoic minimalism comes in. Yes, it can include owning fewer things. Seneca, for example, warned against surrounding yourself with luxury because it makes you soft and dependent. He argued that practicing with less, eating simple meals, wearing plain clothes actually made you stronger. But the bigger idea is that Stoic minimalism is not just about physical clutter. It's about mental and emotional clutter. Think about it. We clutter our minds with endless desires. We clutter our schedules with commitments we don't actually care about. Do we clutter our hearts with comparisons, with envy, with the constant chase for more? The Stoic practice of minimalism says, remove what's unnecessary. Strip life back down to what is essential. Because when you do that, what's left is clarity. Why simplicity equals strength? At first glance, simplicity might sound boring, even weak. Doesn't power come from having more? More wealth, more influence, more options? The Stoics would say no. True power comes from being independent of those things. When you need less, you fear less. When you depend less, you suffer less. Epictetus, who was born a slave and rose to become a great teacher, said it this way: wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. If you live with constant wants, you are never free. Your mind is always restless, chasing, craving, fearing the loss of what it has. But if you cut those wants down to the essentials, suddenly you are free. You are strong, because nothing external can hold you hostage. A modern contrast. Let's contrast this with modern life. Today, we live in an age of abundance. Almost anything we want can be delivered to our door in a day or two. Entertainment is endless. Social media constantly shows us more clothes, more gadgets, more lifestyles to desire. And yet, despite this abundance, anxiety and stress are higher than ever. Why? Because the more we fill our lives, the emptier we often feel. It's like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Possessions don't satisfy desire. They multiply it. One purchase leads to another. One like on social media leads to the craving for 10 more. One achievement leads to the pressure of achieving something greater. The Stoics saw this trap 2,000 years ago. Their solution was radical in its simplicity. Stop feeding the fire. Live with less. Want less. Be content with what is already here. Contentment versus complacency. Now, this is where we need to clear up a common misunderstanding. When Stoics talk about being content with less, It doesn't mean they were against ambition or achievement. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome, clearly not a man who lived in a cave avoiding responsibility. What it means is this: your inner peace should not depend on external success. If fortune brings you wealth, fine. If it takes it away, also fine. What matters is not whether you have more or less, but whether you are free from needing more in order to feel whole. That's the real power of Stoic minimalism. It's about training your mind to be strong regardless of circumstances. Living example, Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius himself is a fascinating case study. He could have lived in luxury every single day. He had palaces, servants, banquets, all the riches of the empire at his fingertips. But when you read his meditations, you don't hear a man obsessed with wealth. You hear a man constantly reminding himself to live simply, to stay disciplined, to avoid being corrupted by power. He writes, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." For Marcus, minimalism wasn't about what was in his palace. It was about what was in his mind. By choosing simplicity, he kept his soul strong, even while ruling one of the most powerful empires in history. The essence of Stoic minimalism. So, if we were to define it clearly, here's what Stoic minimalism really is. It's the practice of removing unnecessary clutter, whether material, mental, or emotional, so that you can focus on what truly matters: virtue, wisdom, and inner strength. It's about choosing less noise so you can hear the voice of reason more clearly. It's about needing less so that nothing external can control you. It's about living simply, not because simplicity is fashionable, but because simplicity makes the mind unshakable. And that's where the title of this video comes full circle. Simple living. Strong mind. Because in the end, simplicity isn't weakness. It's the foundation of strength. The link between simplicity and mental strength. Let's dig a little deeper into why simplicity and a strong mind go hand in hand. First, they might sound like separate things. Living simply sounds like a lifestyle choice. Fewer things, fewer distractions. Having a strong mind sounds like an inner quality: discipline, resilience, clarity. But the two are actually tightly connected. One flows into the other, and the Stoics understood this connection better than most. Think about it this way. The more clutter you allow into your life, the harder it becomes to focus. And I don't just mean physical clutter, like piles of clothes, endless gadgets, or messy desks. I mean mental clutter too: worries, endless what-ifs, fears about the future, regrets about the past. When your life is filled with these distractions, your mind struggles to hold steady. It gets pulled in all directions, like a ship trying to sail in a storm with broken sails. Simplicity, on the other hand, clears away the unnecessary. It strips life down to what really matters. And when you live like that, your mind naturally becomes stronger, calmer, and more focused. The Stoics had a phrase for this. They called it ataraxia, which means tranquility or freedom from disturbance. They weren't naive. They didn't believe life could be free of problems. But they believed that by focusing only on what's essential, and by letting go of what doesn't matter, you create mental space. You create room for strength. Now, let's make this practical. How does living simply actually strengthen your mind? First, simplicity removes decision fatigue. Every day we make hundreds of tiny choices: what to wear, what to eat, what to buy, what to check on our phones. Each of those choices drains a little bit of our mental energy. You might not notice it at first, but by the end of the day, you feel it. That's why people like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg were famous for wearing the same outfit every day. It wasn't about fashion. It was about conserving mental strength. The Stoics didn't wear turtlenecks or hoodies, but they understood the same principle. Seneca, for example, wrote about deliberately living with plain food and clothing. Why? Because when you're not wasting energy on unnecessary choices, your mind stays sharper for the choices that really matter. Second, simplicity teaches you to separate needs from wants. A strong mind isn't one that gets whatever it wants. It's one that can say no, one that knows what's truly important. When you practice living simply, by owning less, wanting less, chasing less, you train your mind to be content. And contentment is a superpower, because when you're content, you can't be manipulated. You can't be pushed around by advertisements, by peer pressure, or by your own restless desires. Marcus Aurelius said it beautifully. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. That's the Stoic version of minimalism. Not chasing endless wants, but strengthening your mind through discipline and clarity. Third, simplicity reduces noise. We live in a world filled with constant noise, notifications, emails, ads, social media, breaking news. Most of it doesn't matter, but it still demands your attention. And the more attention you give away, the weaker your focus becomes. Stoic minimalism is about deliberately cutting away that noise. Not ignoring the world, but being selective about what you let in. Epictetus said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." In other words, don't worry if people think you're strange for not keeping up with every trend, every gadget, every headline. Your strength comes from choosing peace over noise. And when you do that, your mind grows stronger because it learns to concentrate on what's truly meaningful. Now, you might be thinking, does this mean I have to live in an empty apartment with no furniture, no phone, no comforts? Not at all. Stoic minimalism isn't about punishing yourself. It's not about stripping life down to nothing. It's about clarity. It's about looking at everything in your life, your possessions, your habits, your commitments, and asking, does this help me live with virtue, or does it distract me? Does this strengthen my mind, or does it weaken me? When you ask those questions honestly, the unnecessary starts to fall away. Here's a simple example. Imagine 2 mornings. In the first morning, your alarm goes off, but your phone is right next to your bed. You pick it up, and within minutes, you're lost in notifications, news, messages. By the time you get out of bed, your mind is already scattered, restless. Now imagine a second morning. Your phone is in another room. You wake up, stretch, maybe sit for a minute in silence, or write down a few thoughts in a journal. Which morning gives you a stronger mind? The difference isn't small. It's huge. And it all comes down to simplicity, removing one little distraction, creating space for clarity. That's the heart of Stoic minimalism. It's not about depriving yourself. It's about creating space for strength. The less energy you waste on trivial things, the more strength you have for what matters, whether that's facing challenges, supporting others, or living according to your principles. And here's the beautiful part. When your mind grows stronger through simplicity, it also becomes freer. Think about how much of modern life is based on chasing money, status, likes, possessions. All of that chasing makes us slaves to things outside our control. But the Stoics remind us, freedom comes not from getting everything you want, but from needing less. Epictetus, who was born a slave, understood this deeply. He said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." That's the formula for freedom. And freedom is the foundation of strength. Let's pause here. We've explored how simplicity reduces decision fatigue, separates needs from wants, cuts away noise, and creates freedom. Each of these isn't just a lifestyle tip, they're training grounds for the mind. Living simply is like lifting weights for your mental resilience. Every time you say no to what's unnecessary, you say yes to strength. Stoic minimalism in relationships and time. So far, we've talked about simplifying possessions and habits, and how that strengthens the mind. But if we really zoom out, we'll see that the biggest sources of clutter in our lives aren't just physical objects. They're often the invisible things, our relationships, our time, our commitments. These can weigh heavier than any pile of possessions, and the Stoics were deeply aware of this. Let's start with relationships. Now, humans are social creatures. The Stoics never denied that. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that we are made to live in harmony with others. He said, "We are made for cooperation, like feet, like hands, like eyelids, like the rows of the upper and lower teeth." So Stoic minimalism doesn't mean cutting people out of your life and living like a hermit. But it does mean being mindful of who you give your time, energy, and heart to. If you think about it, a lot of stress in life doesn't come from things. It comes from people. From toxic friendships, from shallow relationships, from trying to please everyone. And the Stoics would say, why carry that weight? Why exhaust yourself trying to win approval from people who don't live according to virtue, who don't actually strengthen your character? Seneca put it bluntly, associate with people who are likely to improve you. In other words, choose your company carefully. Not in a snobbish way, but in a way that protects your peace and strengthens your mind. That's relationship minimalism. Fewer but deeper connections. Less chasing of approval. More focus on genuine respect and shared values. Now, this also connects to another huge source of clutter: time. If possessions clutter our homes, and toxic relationships clutter our hearts, then commitments clutter our calendars. How often do we say yes to things we don't want to do? How often do we fill our days with meetings, errands, scrolling, or obligations that don't really serve us? The Stoics saw time as the most precious resource. Seneca wrote an entire essay called On the Shortness of Life, and in it he warns us, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Powerful, right? It's not life that's short. It's our misuse of time that makes it feel short. So Stoic minimalism means treating time with reverence. It means cutting away the unnecessary commitments, just like you cut away unnecessary possessions. Every yes you give is actually a trade. You're trading away a piece of your life. And once it's gone, you can't get it back. The Stoics remind us, say yes carefully. Guard your time. Simplify your schedule. Because a cluttered calendar weakens the mind, while a clear calendar strengthens it. Here's where it all ties together. When you simplify relationships and time, you create space for what truly matters. For the Stoics, what mattered most wasn't possessions or status. It was living with virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, self-control. And you can't live with those virtues if you're constantly distracted, drained, or pulled into shallow pursuits. Simplifying your social and time commitments is like clearing the stage so the real play, your life according to virtue, can unfold. Let's make this concrete with an example. Imagine two people. The first person has hundreds of acquaintances, attends every social gathering, says yes to every favor, and fills their week with endless commitments. On the outside, they look popular and busy, but on the inside, they're exhausted. They don't have time to reflect, to read, to be present with the people they love most. Now imagine a second person. This person has a smaller circle of friends, but those friendships are deep, supportive, rooted in respect. Their schedule is lighter, not because they're lazy, but because they've chosen carefully. They've left space for silence, for self-reflection, for the work that really matters to them. Which one has the stronger mind? The answer is obvious. And the Stoics would say, strength comes from the second path. But here's the challenge. Our culture today pushes us toward the first path. Toward more connections, more events, more commitments. We feel guilty saying no. We feel insecure if our lives look too simple. But Marcus Aurelius had advice for this too. He said, if you seek tranquility, do less. Or more accurately, do what's essential. Notice how he phrases it. It's not about doing nothing. It's about doing less of what doesn't matter, and more of what's essential. That's the essence of Stoic minimalism. Now let's take this one step further. Social minimalism also means letting go of the need for approval. If you're constantly worried about what others think of you, your mind will never be free. You'll live your whole life trying to please people. The Stoics were ruthless about this. Epictetus said, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. Think about that. Are you willing to look strange, even foolish, in the eyes of others, if it means living a stronger, freer life? That's the test of Stoic strength. Simplifying your relationships isn't just about who you spend time with. It's also about releasing the invisible chains of approval seeking. And this brings us to one more point: minimalism of words. The Stoics valued silence, not as a punishment but as a discipline. They believed in speaking less but speaking better. In modern terms, this is another kind of social minimalism. Cutting away unnecessary talk, gossip, complaining, and focusing instead on words that heal, guide, or build. There's strength in restraint. As Marcus said, speak what is necessary and in few words. That's a principle we could all use today. in an age of constant chatter and endless online debates. So to sum up this part, Stoic minimalism isn't just about decluttering your home. It's about decluttering your entire way of living. Simplify your relationships by seeking depth over quantity. Simplify your time by protecting your hours as if they were treasure. Simplify your social interactions by letting go of approval-seeking and empty talk. When you do this, you free your mind from unnecessary weight, and what remains is clarity, strength, and freedom. Returning to nature, the Stoic view of simplicity. Up until now, we've explored how Stoic minimalism applies to possessions, habits, relationships, and time. But there's another dimension the Stoics valued deeply, one that ties everything together: nature. For the Stoics, living simply wasn't just about decluttering life. It was about returning to what is natural, what is aligned with the order of the universe. And in doing so, the mind becomes not only stronger, but more harmonious with life itself. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself over and over again to live according to nature. Now, that phrase might sound vague or abstract today, but to the Stoics it was very practical. It meant stripping away the artificial, the exaggerated, the unnecessary layers we add to life, and coming back to what is essential, real, and natural. It meant eating simply, working honestly, resting properly, and treating life itself as part of a greater order. Think for a moment about how modern life often disconnects us from nature. We wake up to alarms, check our phones before the sun even rises, spend hours under artificial lights, eat food that comes in boxes instead of from the earth, and fill our minds with constant digital noise. There's nothing wrong with technology, it's useful. But when it completely replaces our connection to the natural rhythm of life, something in us feels restless. Something feels off. And that restlessness is what the Stoics tried to solve, not by rejecting progress, but by holding on to simplicity and alignment with nature. Take Epictetus, for example. Born into slavery, he lived much of his life with little. But he often pointed out that nature provides us with what we need: air, water, simple food, a body capable of work. The excesses we chase are not natural needs. They are artificial desires. He said, "Wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants." If you align yourself with what nature truly requires, you realize you already have enough. And that realization builds incredible strength, because it frees you from constant craving. Now, let's get practical. What does living according to nature look like in today's world? Could be as simple as starting your day with sunlight instead of a screen, taking a walk in the park instead of scrolling through endless updates, eating simple meals instead of drowning in processed options, creating space for silence, for reflection, for breathing. Nature itself is minimalistic. A tree doesn't need 10 million ornaments to be beautiful. A river doesn't need to prove itself by rushing faster. Nature has a rhythm of enoughness. And when we align with that rhythm, we find balance. The Stoics also believed that nature was not just external, but internal. Our minds, our bodies, our emotions, they are part of nature too. So living simply means treating yourself as part of that larger whole. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself not to fight against the order of things, but to flow with it. He wrote, "Adapt yourself to the life you have been given, and truly love the people with whom destiny has surrounded you." That's Stoic minimalism. Acceptance of what nature gives you, instead of constantly resisting or demanding more. But here's an important point. Living simply with nature doesn't mean becoming passive or lazy. The Stoics were active people. Marcus Aurelius was emperor, responsible for an entire empire. Epictetus was a teacher guiding students every day. Seneca was a statesman writing letters, making decisions, advising leaders. They didn't retreat into caves to escape the world. Instead, they learned how to live simply within the world, anchored in nature, grounded in essentials, but still fully engaged in life. That balance is what gives Stoic minimalism its power. It doesn't ask you to withdraw. It asks you to participate, but without excess, without distraction, without being enslaved to artificial wants. There's also a deeper connection here: mortality. The Stoics were always mindful of death, not in a morbid way, but as a reminder of perspective. Nature teaches us this constantly. The seasons change, flowers bloom and fade, the sun rises and sets. Everything follows a natural rhythm of life and death. When we live in alignment with nature, we see that our own lives are part of this cycle. And instead of fearing it, we find strength in accepting it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." When you truly understand this, your priorities simplify. You stop wasting time on trivialities. You stop hoarding. You stop chasing what doesn't matter. And you start living with clarity and strength. Now, imagine how this looks in daily practice. You wake up and step outside, taking a breath of fresh air before reaching for your phone. You eat a simple, nourishing breakfast without rushing. You focus on your work, doing it with care and presence, without multitasking on 10 distractions. You take breaks to walk, to breathe, to reconnect with your body. You spend time with people you value, not out of obligation but out of genuine connection. And when the day ends, you rest. You sleep. You let your body recover. That's Stoic minimalism in action. A rhythm of simplicity that aligns with nature's flow. And from that, your mind grows stronger, calmer, and more resilient. We might say that living with nature strips away the artificial layers of life. No more chasing status symbols. No more comparing your life to someone else's highlight reel. No more exhausting yourself with things that don't matter. Instead, it's about noticing the sunrise, feeling gratitude for the food on your table, accepting the ups and downs as part of the cycle. This doesn't mean your life will be free of challenges, but it means your challenges will feel more natural, less overwhelming. Because you're not fighting against the current, you're flowing with it. And this brings us back to the Stoic vision of strength. A strong mind isn't just one that resists pain or stands firm in crisis. It's one that accepts the order of life, lives simply within it, and doesn't get shaken by excess or loss. That's why simplicity and strength go hand in hand. Because when you live according to nature, nothing feels foreign, nothing feels unbearable. Everything just feels like part of the whole. Living the Stoic minimalist life. We've walked through possessions, habits, relationships, time, and even our alignment with nature. Each of these areas shows us how simplicity strengthens the mind. But now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. What does it really mean to live the Stoic minimalist life? How does it feel? And why is it so powerful? First, let's clear away a common misunderstanding. Stoic minimalism doesn't mean living in emptiness or stripping joy out of life. It doesn't mean you can't own nice things, enjoy comfort, or take part in the world. What it does mean is that you don't become dependent on those things. You enjoy them when they're there, but you're strong enough to stand without them. Seneca said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." That's the essence. True wealth isn't in what you own. It's in what you can live without. A Stoic minimalist life is one of freedom. Freedom from clutter, yes, but also from fear, from craving, from being pulled in every direction by the world. Imagine for a moment what it feels like to not need constant approval, to not be enslaved by possessions, to not fill your days with obligations that drain you. Imagine a life where you can focus, where you can breathe, where your mind feels steady even in the middle of chaos. That's the gift of simplicity. That's the strength it gives you. And here's where the Stoics take it one step further. Simplicity isn't just about what you remove, it's about what you add. Because when you clear away the noise, you create space for virtue, for wisdom, courage, justice, self-control. These 4 Stoic virtues are like the pillars of a strong mind. And without simplicity, they're almost impossible to practice. Take wisdom, for example. How can you reflect, study, or think deeply if your mind is always distracted, cluttered, overwhelmed? Simplicity creates the quiet you need for wisdom to grow. Or courage. If you're tied down by possessions or social approval, how can you be brave? You'll always fear losing what you've clung to. But if you live simply, if you need little, then you're free to act courageously. Justice, too. A cluttered life makes you self-centered, too busy to see others clearly. A simple life gives you the space to notice, to care, to act fairly. and self-control perhaps the most obvious. Simplicity is a training ground for discipline. Every time you say no to something unnecessary, every time you choose enough over excess, you're strengthening your self-control. And that self-control bleeds into every other part of your life. So the Stoic minimalist life isn't about owning less. It's about being more. More focused. More resilient. More virtuous. More free. Now let's talk about resilience, because this is where simplicity really shines. Life is unpredictable. We can't control what happens: illness, loss, failure, change. But we can control how prepared we are. A person who lives in excess, who depends on comfort, who is tied to possessions, is fragile. When life takes those things away, they collapse. But a person who has trained their mind through simplicity, who has practiced living with less, who has built strength from within, that person can withstand almost anything. Seneca recommended practicing poverty, even when he was wealthy, just to remind himself that he could handle it. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" That's resilience. That's preparing the mind through simplicity. And what about meaning? A Stoic minimalist life clears the ground so you can focus on what truly matters. For some, that might mean building deep relationships. For others, it might mean creating, serving, teaching, or leading. Whatever it is, simplicity allows you to direct your energy there. Because meaning is found not in distractions, but in depth. And depth requires focus. This is why Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, constantly reminded himself to stay simple. He didn't want to be lost in luxury or flattery. He wanted to live with purpose. He wrote, "Love the humble art you have learned and take rest in it. Pass through the rest of life as one who has entrusted all he has, with his whole heart, to the gods, and makes yourself neither tyrant nor slave to any man." That's the Stoic minimalist spirit. Live your art, live your virtue, live simply, live free. Now, I want you to picture something. Picture your life as a table. On that table sits everything you've allowed in: possessions, commitments, relationships, distractions. Right now, for most of us, that table is overflowing. Things are stacked on top of each other, spilling onto the floor, leaving no space to breathe. Stoic minimalism is the act of clearing that table. Removing what doesn't serve you, keeping only what strengthens you, what aligns with virtue, what gives meaning. And when the table is clear, suddenly you see what really matters. Suddenly, you can use the space for what you were meant to build. That's the freedom. That's the strength. So how do we begin? Start small. You don't have to change your whole life overnight. Pick one area, maybe your possessions, maybe your schedule, maybe your digital habits, and clear a little space. Notice how it feels. Notice how your mind reacts. Then slowly extend it into other areas. Over time, simplicity becomes not just a practice, but a way of being. And the strength that comes with it builds quietly, like a muscle trained day by day. At the end of it all, Stoic minimalism is about living a life where your mind is unshaken, your values are clear, and your heart is free. A life where you're not pulled by every desire or fear, but anchored in what really matters. A life where simplicity is not emptiness, but fullness, the fullness of peace, strength, and purpose. The Stoics knew that simple living creates a strong mind, and a strong mind creates a strong life. That's their message to us across the centuries. And maybe, in our noisy, cluttered, restless modern world, it's a message we need now more than ever. So as you step back into your own life, ask yourself, what can I remove? What can I simplify? What really matters? And remember Marcus Aurelius's timeless advice. Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Live simply. Live strongly. Live stoically.